This is TAU Unbound, the English language podcast of Tel-Aviv University. Please welcome your host, Ido Aharoni, Tel-Aviv University's graduate, member of the Board of Governors, lecturer, writer, and veteran diplomat.
Welcome to another episode of TAU Unbound. I'm Ido Aharoni, your host, and today it is my pleasure to host Professor Yuval Gadot, who's the head of the Department of Archaeology and Ancient Near East Cultures.
Yeah, Near Eastern cultures.
Near Eastern cultures. I think I got the title right.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much.
So, we host here a wide variety of members of the faculty, but we have not had an archaeologist yet. You're the first.
Yeah.
So let's start by hearing a little bit about your own background. Tell us a little bit about where you were brought up and how you ended up in archaeology.
Okay, so I grew up here in the suburbs of Tel Aviv, wanting to be outside a lot. I always liked history, but I think if you grow up here in youth movements and החברה להגנת הטבע, the protection of nature society, you always go out.
By the way, for the benefit of our listeners and our viewers, I should say that the Society for the Preservation of Natural Life in Israel was founded in the late 1950s, early 1960s, and was one of the first environmentalist groups in the world.
Yeah, and very influential.
Very influential.
And very, like educational-wise, I am growing up in a society that cares about, every Saturday you walk somewhere, you hear guiding tours and so on.
So you consider yourself a product
something like that.
That system.
Yes.
That really cared about nature.
Yeah. And then I found myself already in the army guiding tours. And when I came to the university, I knew that I didn't know what archaeology is, but I knew that I want to kind of put together knowledge, being outside, and this thing of touring or that thing. And
so
when I went,
you like the outdoors, and where did you obtain your first degree?
Here at the TAU.
At Tel Aviv University.
First, second, and the PhD.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
from the moment I went into the room, I said, okay, that's what I want to do. I want to be an archaeologist. And
what was the first experience you had in archaeology that really cemented it for you?
I went into digging at Megiddo. And Megiddo this was a new expedition held by my teachers, Professor Israel Finkelstein and Professor David Osishkin. And it brought up students from all over the world, mainly from the States, but not only. And it's like a camp. You stay there for 2 or 3 weeks and so on. And we went into the squares that we mark. We began to dig, and that was that.
And that was your first archaeological digging.
Yep.
In Tel Megiddo.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. And that was when?
This is 1994.
1994.
Yeah. And you see, you stand there, and there are people coming from all over the world, and they want to know about Megiddo. And you say, okay, what's in here in this ground that make everybody so interested, and everybody's like, there's something in their eyes as if they're going to reveal the biggest secrets ever. And then you learn to appreciate the place of archaeology in Israel. The fact that it combines knowledge, and now we know also science, and the biblical traditions, the identity of so many millions of people around the world. Everything is kind of focused down to this ground when you're digging.
And the purpose of archaeology, and again, you mentioned that you're also, the name of your department is Archaeology and Near Eastern
cultures,
the study of
the ancients.
Near Eastern cultures. How would you define Near East? Again, for the benefit of our audience.
It begins by a sense that I think that was right for the people who kind of established the department, is that if you want to know about the history of this land, which is really crucial and important, it cannot be an island. Okay, it's a culture within cultures, and especially geographically now, this area that is called Israel or Southern Levant, it's a kind of a bridge between Egypt to the south, and then you have the Mesopotamian cultures where Iraq is today, the Syrian cultures, the Anatolian cultures. We are in the middle, and there are things coming from the north down and from the south up, And it's a unique culture by itself, but it's not a unique island culture. And for a student to understand what he sees when he's digging here, he needs to understand the world around. And the world around, actually, to tell the truth, we are kind of in the backyard of all of these empires.
By the way, how does it impact your work as an Israeli archaeologist, the fact that you cannot practically conduct research in other Near Eastern countries?
It's a matter of collaborations. With Egypt, it's easier in the last generation. We do not work in Syria, Lebanon, or Iraq, but we do collaborate with Europeans and Americans. And sometimes when you go to conferences abroad, you get the chance to speak with Lebanese and Syrian archaeologists, off record. You get to share the knowledge, but it's definitely impacting, and it's not the way it should be.
So you started in what is known as Megiddo, and today you're mostly working and studying in the Jerusalem area. Tell us about that work.
I'm digging in a very peaceful place called the City of David. Some people call it Silwan. We call it, just to kind of create a vacuum of political things, we call it the Southeastern Ridge. This is just the outskirts of Temple Mount, Haram el-Sharif. And this is the kind of the core of historical Jerusalem. We have old Jerusalem, which is surrounded by walls, but it's not really old. It's 2,000 years old. And you have older Jerusalem, where the national park, what is called today City of David, is located. And that's where I'm working. And in a sense, it's a continuation of what I learned to do at Megiddo. It's the combination of text, archaeology, and history to create a picture of what was here 3,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago, and so on.
So you're now excavating areas that are 3,000 years old?
And older.
And older than that.
Yeah.
And what are you discovering there?
The thing that we are discovering is leftovers, ruined buildings, shattered pottery vessels, chewed bones that were discarded and of animals and so on.
So take us through the process, for those of us who are not experts in archaeology, of what can you learn from something that may seem to the unfamiliar person may seem unimportant.
Yeah, it all looks mundane and stones, earth, stones, and so on. But the amount of information that is kind of, it's not buried, it's like inside, waiting for somebody to kind of explode it out, is unbelievable. And actually, I think my generation of archaeologists are going through a phase of almost like a revolution from being very, very humanistic in our approach to at least applying science methods in order to say, it's not just a bone. I can say what kind of animal it was and what part of the animal, and then to go to the question of where was the animal brought up in its youthhood and so on. And if you translate these questions into culture, you can actually say what were people eating and what were they avoiding or they were not able to reach, like the better part of the animal and the worst part of the animal. So you have rich or poor people, you have ideological choices of what you put in your plate, and then where was the animal raised? This can tell you things about trade and so on. So we go from facts and exploiting information out of the facts.
And that obviously requires a great deal of collaboration with other departments.
A lot. The archaeology is, when you say archaeology, you say interdisciplinary study. Yes, definitely.
And can you just to trigger our imagination, can you share with us one particular technology that's being used in the process of decoding the meaning of an artifact?
We are now, I think, I'll tell you kind of, we dug a building in Jerusalem, and it was very clear from the beginning that this is a kind of very well-off building within the city. And it was very good. The preservation was good because it was destroyed by the Babylonians in 586. So this is like a time machine going to 586, the destruction of Jerusalem, and the life of the people just to the destruction. And we understood that we need to cooperate with as many people as possible. Actually, we turned it into a lab. Anybody who comes with an idea, welcome. Let's do something together. And we used archaeozoology, which I mentioned before. We used archaeobotany in order to get all of the fruit remains and plant remains. We used now we are using there's a student doing a PhD on the wood remains, not the vegetation, charcoal that fire. And then you think that this will be trivial things about wood. So okay, they go around. No, but you see that they are bringing wood from far away. There's movement, there's choice with the wood. Wood is full of symbolism. We talked before about Christianity and the olive wood being so holy in its conception. So we see other kind of woods that they choose to build with them. And one of the latest thing is that we kind of combined chemistry. We find vessels that were smashed, destroyed by their hundreds. But you don't ever know what their content is. And chemistry allows you to extract the molecules that are kind of preserved within the sherd itself. You crush the sherd, you extract the molecules, and then you can say something about the material that were held within the wine. And we were thinking about this place as a very rich and kind of bountiful place. And now we know that whoever lived in this building had his wine store at the basement. And then these jars of wine were flavored by vanillin. And vanillin had to be exported from either India or Africa, these tropical areas, probably to Egypt or to the cultures in Mesopotamia, and then brought to somehow arriving in Jerusalem through these trade networks. This is a very detailed picture of these nobles of Jerusalem just before the destruction.
And that gives you a very strong sense of the kind of life these people had 3,000 years ago.
Yeah, and then you start contrasting them. Everybody lived in Jerusalem in this kind of lifestyle? Probably not. And then, so you go in other places and you dig and you don't find these things.
By the way, what was the life expectancy of a human being in those days?
I would say 50, 60, 70.
50, 60.
Yeah. We don't dig much burials, so we don't really know. There's not a lot of done with the burials.
And in terms of life, in this particular case in Jerusalem, 2,500 years ago, 3,000 years ago, how would you describe life in those places?
These specific guys that we dug their house, this is the elite of Jerusalem. They had
a good life.
Very, yeah, considering the fact that they were destroyed in 586, yes. They actually, in the biblical text, you can even find some criticism by some of the prophets about, how they care about the joy of life, and they are not ideological enough. And they're warned that if they won't cooperate, they do that and so on, God will punish them, and the punishment is the destruction, according to the ideology of the people who wrote the text.
What can be said about ancient texts after you learn the facts from your archaeological digging, in terms of are they compatible?
They are compatible in some things and are not compatible in other things. And I think that the thing is always to think about the text and what it meant to say or to do, and the artifacts and what they meant to say and to do. I was digging together with other colleagues at Ramat Rachel when we found the palace from these days exactly. This palace is not mentioned at all in the biblical text. It's like somebody living today in Jerusalem and not mentioning the Knesset or the Israel Museum. And it's a powerful building. And then you say to yourself, okay, they did not write a book in order to describe everything. This is an ideological book that speaks about the independence of Judah and the hands of God within the history, the national history of the Judeans and so on. And they probably had a reason why they wanted to ignore this palace. It didn't fit their ideology. They did not like that. And we understood that this palace is representing the empires. So there was a fight of power between at least two, maybe more parties within Judah. And one party was writing the text and describing its concept of history, ignoring facts that did not fit their aim. Others were living in a palace in Jerusalem in Ramat Rachel, and probably ignoring other facts. And if we had their text, it would sound very, very different. So it's not a yes or no question. It's not a black and white. It's a text, and then, okay, who is standing behind the text? It's archaeology, and then who is standing behind this site, specific site. And I think a kind of a weaving work of somebody like an archaeologist or an historian that places both things together in order to say, okay, these are the nobles of Jerusalem, this is their conception, I have this other party, and that's their conception of history, and so on.
So you are, in the process, you're also able to reconstruct, basically, the historical context of the time.
Exactly.
In order to understand the importance of
we all learn about the taboo about not eating pigs, pork in Judaism. It appears in the biblical text. Do all people in Jerusalem always observe this law? We can see now that it's not 100%. Even if you go back to the days when the commands were written, this idea was written, you do find pork in Jerusalem. Some, not a lot, but it's a game of understanding the context, of understanding why was this criticism, like this law was like the abolishing of pork was.
Now, let me ask you a question that I know that many archaeologists face, which is the tension between the science of archaeology and archaeological discoveries. What happens when they contradict religious beliefs? Because I know that a lot of people of faith are drawn to archaeology.
Okay.
Because for them, it proves a point. But what happens when there's a clash between their belief and the archaeological facts?
First of all, at least for myself, I'll say, I have Yuval Gadot coming from a Jewish culture and so on. And I sit in Passover and I read the Agadah, and I don't ask myself, was that an event or wasn't it an event, and so on. I don't ask these questions. Okay, and then there's this other person, Yuval Gadot, who is working in archaeology and trying to say, is that an historical moment, this exodus out of Egypt? It's two different things. I don't think I need to change my culture because of what I find.
Right.
Okay, so that's the first thing, and I don't push anybody else to do that. And these books have their place in culture, which is much more it's so well established that I don't think we need to poke into it and say, okay, but we know that it's a little bit different. And second is, I think, as I said before, it's not the books are all wrong or the books are all right in connection. It's let's go into something that it's so meaningful so for so many people, and try to create an image that better explains this to us today, in a sense.
And you say there's a separation between that and the story that we tell in our culture.
Yep.
Because the story can be...
The story is what makes us people, it's what makes us nation. This gives us moral, this gives us an understanding of the world. And
right.
that's one thing.
It's like movies, in Hollywood, they say this movie is based on actual events, but it's not necessarily accurate.
Yep.
So that's basically the same thing.
Okay. And a story that survived for 3,000 years, probably if any Hollywood movie would stay for 3,000 years as a moral, then it has its place, and you don't need to ask any more questions about it.
Right. Now, tell us a little bit about your department. I'm assuming because Israel is such a magnet for archaeologists that you have a great deal of international outreach.
Yeah, we have an international program, an MA, that deals with the archaeology of Israel. Even in the days of the pandemic, we had students coming here from all over the world. No Zoom, it's the hands-on experience of learning pottery, of excavating, of touring with us at these sites that I mentioned, Megiddo, Jerusalem, and so on. And we have their students coming from who knows how many countries, Americans and India, people from India and people from China and Russians and so on. And it's now already something like 11 years that we have this program. And then the students themselves, we have a BA, MA, we have students learning languages, ancient languages, Hittite and Akkadian, and reading Egypt, hieroglyphs and so on.
Now, in terms of international participation, where would you say most of the students come from?
Most of them come from the States. First of all, it's an English-speaking program, so it's easier for them. Also, studying in the United States is very expensive. Tel Aviv is expensive for Israelis, but for Americans, that's an option. So we have many of them coming from there. Also, the interaction is more like that. And then Germany. Theology students in Germany come a lot. They join excavations. They do exactly what you asked. They study the text. This is the world, but they want to understand the reality behind the text, and so on.
Now, you probably noticed I'm wearing, our listeners can't see my shirt, but I'm wearing an NBA shirt. And the commissioner of the NBA, Adam Silver, who's a good friend of mine for many years, told me, first time I met him, which was about 20 years ago, that his first visit to Israel was to participate in archaeological digging, and he spent 30 days here in Israel. And I think he mentioned it was done in the Jericho area, so I guess it was
very hot.
So I guess it was before the Oslo Accords, but you know, Israel is a draw. Archaeology is a big draw, and what I would like to ask you is, what would you like to see going forward for your department in terms of your international outreach, in terms of your emphasis on research, in terms of the facilities that you have?
I would like to see the Israeli archaeology standing at the center of world debates. In that sense, I think it's just it's a very small country, but still very varied, and it was important in so many periods. And so you can use the archaeology of Israel to ask very, very specific questions, but also very global questions. You can deal with human movement from 1 million years ago until today, out of Africa. It all passed through Israel. All of these movements of people out of Africa and back to Africa and out again and so on, everything is passing by here. And then the establishment of a culture, domestication of fire, domestication of the animals, we are at the core of these events in that sense. And when you move to historical periods, even if you take, we excavate, we have an expedition at Masada by Dr. Guy Stiebel is excavating there. Masada is a very, very specific question. Did they commit a suicide? Did they not commit suicide? We all know that story, and it's an important story. But at the same time, you're dealing there with refugees, okay, people that fled to the desert in order to survive. And refugees are it's a big concern of our society today. Can you learn something from the way these refugees acted in this kind of historical context that we know? And you look at their material culture. What did they eat? What did they avoid? How were they organized? And so on. Can you learn something from their lesson that can help dealing with refugees today? Or can we learn something from refugees today that will explain us better what happened at Masada? And so it's a very local thing, but it's a very global thing. And if I take another example, we are all facing a climate crisis, but humans have been dealing with climate ever since their existence. So can we learn from the past lessons that can help us understand better how we should face climate change? And it's not the first time that climate has changed, and people were completely dependent. There was no air condition. There was no water coming from I don't know where that they could reach. So how did they balance themselves with the environment without losing the battle, in a sense?
By the way, I'm thinking as you're speaking about what tools will the archaeologist of the future have to study us, let's say 1,000, 2,000 years from now. I'm sure that we are creating a civilization, with all the technology that we have, that will make it very difficult for the future archaeologists to know what exactly happened here.
In a sense, yes. We are always trying to understand what is an elephant by, checking its part of its leg and trying to imagine the rest of the elephant. The thing is that it's now, first of all, it's all big. So, excavating huge buildings like today or huge tunnels and so on, not easy. And a lot of data is now in the air.
Exactly.
in the cloud.
How do you excavate a cloud?
They'll find a way. They'll find a way.
That's the artificial intelligence. How can they understand and will they have the tools to decode our technology today? I mean, these are all very, very big questions.
Yep. Our old floppy disks. If you find a way, I need that.
Well, Professor Gadot, I could have a much longer conversation with you, but I think our time is up. Okay. I wanted to thank you for spending time with us and really educating us about archaeology and the importance of your department in the overall structure here at the university. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And to you, our viewers and our listeners, until our next episode, goodbye from Tel Aviv.
This is TAU Unbound, the English language podcast of Tel Aviv University. Please welcome your host, Ido Aharoni, Tel Aviv University's graduate, member of the Board of Governors, lecturer, writer, and veteran diplomat.